I'm gonna be honest, I did not expect this channel to take off that quickly, but here we are. So whether you've been following one of my other channels for a long time, or you just found this channel for the first time when YouTube's wonderful algorithm picked up my last video and started recommending it to people, welcome. Glad to have you here. So among the people that video got recommended to were my friends that I play with, the people in my play group, and they were talking about it in Discord, and one of them said, "Now talk about the time you built Shroofus and accidentally won on turn 4. So I guess that's the deck we're going to talk about today. Right away I should say, I don't think it was turn 4, it might have been turn 5 or 6, but basically the story is, I built this deck and I wanted to test it out, so I told everyone, hey, I don't know what kind of power level this deck plays at, I just want to test it and see how it does. And then it did that. So yeah, I think it works pretty well. Shroofus Sproutsire. If it's not already my favorite Magic card, it will be soon. I love this guy. Before we get into the individual cards in the deck, let me just tell you the backstory of how it came about. There's really two pieces to the puzzle. Number one is that I've just always loved Saprolings. Ever since I was a kid, I loved playing with Saproling tokens. I love the idea of mushrooms coming to life and being the creatures doing the fighting for me. And I just love creature tokens in general because I feel like they surpass the natural constraints of having a limited deck size. Like, for example, if there's 100 cards in my deck, those are the 100 cards that I can cast, that I can play with, the creatures that I can attack with. But if I'm playing a token strategy, there's really no limit on the size of the board I can build. I could have 500 creature tokens attacking. Generating creature tokens just takes the lid off of a deck, and I love that. In fact, I love Saprolings so much that last year when I had just started playing Commander, I was in Japan and I went to a bunch of card shops because I was just really excited about Magic again, but I didn't know what cards I needed because I didn't have a deck, so I didn't know what I was looking for. The only cards that I bought were basic lands and Saproling tokens. You really don't need to read Japanese to know what either of those do, and I knew I was going to use basic lands, and I knew at some point I was going to use Saproling tokens. So that's the Saproling piece of the puzzle. The second thing that brought this deck to life was, I just heard that aggro is not good in Commander. I'll admit I'm pretty new to Commander. I've been playing Magic on and off for 25 years, but I've really only been playing Commander for the last 6 months or so. So I'm still getting familiar with the format, with the meta, and I keep hearing that aggro just doesn't scale well in Commander. It doesn't work as well in 4-player. It makes a lot of sense. In a 1v1 constructed or limited game, I have to do 20 damage to my opponent to win the game. In Commander, I have to do 120 damage split among 3 different opponents to win the game. So by that logic, I can see how aggro probably doesn't scale well in Commander. But I took that as a challenge. I wanted to see if I could build an aggro deck that wins in Commander and also does it for less than $100. So the current build that I'm about to show you it's a little over $100. It's $120, but really you could take out this one card and pretty much get it down to $100. It's really only in there because I pulled it when I went to the Lord of the Rings pre-release, but you could easily replace it with a 50-cent card that does more or less the same thing. So let's look at the deck. Here's the deck laid out into kind of its main categories of cards, and of course, we'll start with the Commander. Shroofus Sproutsire, the first creature to ever be printed with a Saproling creature type. Before this, it was only tokens, and that's part of why I love him. It's the first one. So Shroofus, for 3 mana, is a 1/1 with trample, and he says, whenever a Saproling you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens. So my first thought was like, yeah, play a bunch of cards that make a bunch of Saprolings. But then I realized, I only need 1. Shroofus will make Saprolings when he deals combat damage. So the idea behind the deck is really simple. Get Shroofus out early, attack, and start making Saprolings. Those Saprolings attack and make more Saprolings. It goes exponential really quickly. And within a few turns, if everything goes well, you have enough Saprolings on board to take out everyone at the table. So the deck is built to really get Shroofus out and attacking as soon as possible. There are 14 pieces of 1 mana ramp because you really want to have one of these on turn 1, so that way you can have 3 mana on turn 2 and cast Shroofus turn 2. I think Sakura Tribe Scout is the most expensive one. It just lets you put a land into play at instant speed, but I pretty much chose all the cheapest 1 mana ramp. Oh, I take it back. Birds of Paradise is the most expensive. That's why I have the gold border printing. It's cheaper that way. But some of these are mana dorks, some of them, like Arboreal Grazer, Sakura Tribe Scout, put an extra land into play. But the idea is really simple. It's just have 3 mana available on turn 2, and that's why I spent 14 slots in my deck to make sure that that's always going to happen. Shroofus is going to attack on turn 3, and when he does, there's basically 3 possible outcomes. Number 1, no blocks, no interaction, he gets in for 1 damage, you make 1 Saproling. Number 2, someone tries to kill him with removal. Or number 3, well, maybe there's no empty board for some reason, and everyone has like a 1/1 chump blocker. So, in the situation that someone tries to remove him on turn 3, there's a lot of protection in this deck. A lot of instant speed protection. Sorry, I know this is in Japanese, sorry. It's Snakeskin Veil. You know, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it gains hexproof until end of turn. So if you're attacking on turn 3 with Shroofus and someone doesn't want to let you in, they try to remove Shroofus, you have a Snakeskin Veil, you have Royal Treatment, gives it hexproof until end of turn, you have Tyvar's Stand, hexproof and indestructible, Vines of Vastwood, it gives hexproof, but if you pay the kicker cost, it also gives +4/+4. So now, not only did you not kill Shroofus, he's now 5/5, and you're making 5 Saproling tokens on turn 3. And then behind all these instant speed effects, you have Sereth the Viper's Fang, which does double duty here. Tapped creatures have Death Touch, untapped creatures have Hexproof. Hexproof is going to protect Shroofus when he's not attacking, and giving all your attacking creatures Death Touch is just going to make them harder to block. So if you've cast Vines of Vastwood, and now you have your 5 Saprolings, Shroofus doesn't have to attack anymore. He can just stay back and get Hexproof. You can send 5 other Saprolings with Death Touch in. Asceticism is another permanent Hexproof effect for later in the game. It also regenerates a creature, so it helps against removal for Shroofus. And Diamond City is a land that gives some protection. So it makes colorless mana, but it also enters with a shield counter on it, and you can move that shield counter onto a creature, which is going to be Shroofus, if 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn, which is pretty easy to do. If you can hit someone with 2 Saprolings, you're going to make 2 more Saprolings, and then you can move that shield counter onto Shroofus. So that's a lot of cards that are meant to protect Shroofus, because he really is the most important piece. And you can see that the choices I've made here for protection spells are really doing double duty. They're all giving hexproof indestructible, but also giving a power and toughness boost. So +1/+1, +X/+X, depending on how much mana you want to spend, +4/+4. So not only are you protecting Shroofus, you're also pumping him, and therefore making more Saprolings even faster and getting off to a better start. And obviously we're playing aggro, so a fast start is very important. The next category of cards, and the next thing you want to be casting, is an Anthem effect. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 Anthem effects in the deck. Heraldic Banner, it's a mana rock, but it also gives creatures of a chosen color +1/+0. Obviously we're choosing green. You could also use Patchwork Banner and choose Saproling as a creature type, but Heraldic Banner is like $7 cheaper, or something like that. Effectively, it does the same thing. It gives +1 power, which means your Saprolings are going to make twice as many Saprolings, and it also makes a little bit of mana. So you have mana up after casting this for something like a Royal Treatment, Snakeskin Veil. Sylvan Anthem gives green creatures +1/+1, and when a green creature enters, you scry 1. So every time you make a Saproling, scry 1. Once you're making a lot of Saprolings in a single turn, you can look through like 20 or 30 cards to find something for your next draw. Tribute to the World Tree, this is an expensive card. I think it's the second most expensive card in the deck. It's, well, okay, look, I'll put the English version up for you. When a creature enters under your control, if its power is 3 or greater, draw a card. If it's less than that, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So when your Saprolings are just coming in for the first time, no other buffs, they're all going to become 3/3s. And if you have another Anthem, if you have other Anthems on the field and they're coming in at 3 power or greater, you're going to draw cards off of all of them. Again, one of the more expensive cards in the deck, but definitely very worth it. The next Anthem is Ruxa, Patient Professor. Ruxa loves creatures with no abilities. They get +1/+1, that's all our Saproling tokens getting +1/+1, and you may have creatures you control with no abilities assign their combat damage as though they weren't blocked. So this basically makes it impossible to stop the Saprolings, because if I'm coming at you with 10 2/2 Saprolings, even if you block all of them, you're still taking 20 Saproling damage, and I'm making 20 more 2/2 Saprolings. The next Anthem effect is one of the few other cards in the deck that actually makes Saprolings, Tendershoot Dryad. It makes a Saproling at the beginning of each upkeep, which is great, because in one turn cycle, you're making 4. And then if you have the City's Blessing, which you're going to have pretty quickly with the amount of Saprolings you're making, they all get +2/+2. Next up, Eldrazi Monument. Creatures you control get +1/+1, have flying and indestructible. Flying Saprolings, bigger Saprolings, indestructible Saprolings. This is a great Anthem effect because it's protecting all your creatures from a lot of board wipes as well. Anything destroy or damage based doesn't matter anymore. This deck's biggest weakness is board wipes, so having indestructible on all your creatures is incredibly valuable. And then the final Anthem, and really the most impressive one, is Beastmaster Ascension. Whenever a creature you control attacks, put a quest counter on it. As long as it has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. So that first game where I won on like turn 5, 6, whatever it was, Beastmaster Ascension was the Anthem I got out. If you've been making Saprolings for like 2 turns, you're probably going to have 7 of them. Once those 7 attack, they're all immediately getting +5/+5. That means 7 times 6 is 42 power. You're knocking out one opponent as soon as this is online and you're attacking. Oh, and then making 42 more 6/6 Saprolings, and then the game's just over on the next turn. Our next category is here to speed things up. They're basically giant growths, but I chose a lot of scaling giant growths. So for 1 mana, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature you control. So the idea behind all these cards is just pump something to get some extra damage in. If you have 5 Saprolings and 4 of them get blocked, you can pump 1 of them and still get in for 6 damage. If you're attacking with Shroofus and he gets blocked, well, he already has Trample, so giving him +5/+5, +6/+6, it's going to do a lot. Echoing Courage says target creature and all other creatures that share the same name as that creature get +2/+2 until end of turn. Well, Saproling tokens all have the same name, so they're all getting +2/+2 for 2 mana. Invigorate is fun. It's a card that I played with in my childhood. Mercadian Masks had just come out when I started playing Magic, and it's nice to just use a card that I used to play with as a kid. If you control a forest, you can have an opponent gain 3 life instead of paying Invigorate's mana cost, so you can cast it for free, and you can give one of your creatures +4/+4. If that's Shroofus, that's +4/+4. He's already got Trample. It's just free pump, nice to have, and I mean, this art, I just remember it so vividly from my childhood. Makes me happy. And then finally, Bridgeworks Battle. It's sorcery speed, so it's not exactly a giant growth, but it can help you get in for an early attack if, say, everyone has a blocker, they all have like a mana dork or something small on the field. You can give Shroofus +2/+2 and fight one of those things to clear out a blocker, and then you just have a clear attack, and you're getting, you know, +2/+2, so 3 Saprolings off of that attack. So this just helps clear up an early attack for you. Next up, no deck is complete without draw. For the card draw, well, first of all, I'm playing mono green, so it's all pretty dependent on creatures, but there's a lot that trigger on combat damage, so there's some instant speed ones that draw you cards when a creature deals combat damage. Trash the Town also doubles as another pump effect. You can pay a little extra to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. Then you have the permanent curiosity effects. Both Toski and Orin Frostfang will draw you a card whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player, and you're attacking with a lot of creatures, so that's going to draw you a lot of cards. Season of Growth is going to let you scry whenever a creature enters the battlefield, so you're going to scry off all your Saprolings that get generated. But when you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. Well, I mean, here's 2 that do that, and then you've already seen like 15 plus all these, they all target your creatures. So this basically turns all your pump spells into cantrips as well. Fecundity is great. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, that creature's controller may draw a card. Like, yeah, sure, your opponents might draw some cards off this when their stuff dies, but ideally you're going to be making way more creatures than your opponents, and this can help deter against board wipes. It can also help you rebuild after board wipes. And like I said, board wipes are this deck's biggest weakness. So if you have 20 plus Saprolings on board, someone destroys them all, at least you're going to draw 20 cards off of that, and definitely have a handful of cards to rebuild. Next up is a modal card, Return of the Wild Speaker. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, but it also has this other mode that can just help you end the game. Non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So you can surprise your opponents with this. At instant speed, just give all 50 of your Saprolings +3/+3 until end of turn, and that can definitely close out the game. The final card draw is draw a card for each creature you control, Shamanic Revelation. As a bonus, if you have Anthems out, you can gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. But at the very least, for 5 mana, you're drawing a whole lot of cards because ideally you have a whole lot of Saprolings on the board. Okay, I've been saying this whole time that board wipes are the deck's biggest weakness, so these next few cards are here specifically to help you be more resilient after board wipes, and I've kind of figured out how to play the deck better. You do sometimes have to sandbag, hold some things back, and be careful about when you play and use these cards because board wipes are going to happen and you are going to have to rebuild from them. So the idea behind most of these cards is they're going to help you get more Saproling tokens out at instant speed. So one of your opponents casts a board wipe and you can use these cards to rebuild your board before it even gets back to your turn. So that way, on your turn, you already have Saprolings out that are ready to attack. You can recast Shroofus and all those Saprolings are going to start building your board up exponentially again. So fungal plots, pay 2, exile a creature card from your graveyard, make a Saproling creature token. It's also great insurance against board wipes because you can sacrifice 2 Saprolings to gain 2 life and draw a card. If someone's going to wipe the board, you can just sacrifice all your Saprolings in response, gain a bunch of life, draw a bunch of cards. Yeah, you still lose everything in the board wipe, but you lose it and gain value from it. Night Soil is similar, and I just think it's really cool to run a card from Fallen Empires, a notoriously bad set. For 1 mana, you can exile 2 creatures in any graveyard to put a Saproling creature token onto the battlefield. After a board wipe, graveyards are going to be full, and for 1 mana, you can make a Saproling as many times as you have the mana, and as long as your opponents have enough creatures in the graveyard. Last night I used this after a board wipe to make like 5 Saprolings before it even got back to my turn. Next up, Fungal Rebirth helps after a board wipe. It returns a permanent from your graveyard to your hand. It could be one of your creatures. You could let Shroofus go to the graveyard if you're holding this, so then you don't have to pay the commander tax. It's going to get you a card back, and it's also going to make 2 Saprolings if a creature died this turn. So you cast this right after the board wipe, you get a card back to your hand, and you get 2 Saprolings. Saproling Cluster is another card that's going to let you make Saprolings at instant speed. Pay 1, discard a card, make a Saproling. Any player can play this ability, but let's be honest, no one's going to benefit from it as much as you. Next up is Invocación Salvaje, or Savage Summoning. It basically lets you cast your next creature at instant speed. So if you need to get Shroofus out back on the board before it gets back to your turn, you can cast him right away with a +1/+1 counter. Just helps you get Shroofus out faster before it even gets back to your turn. And then finally, Utopia Mycon. It gives you insurance because you can sacrifice all your Saprolings in response for mana. So let's say someone's wiping the board, you just sacrifice all your Saprolings, get a bunch of mana, then you have Savage Summoning, you cast that, you can cast Shroofus at instant speed. This is just good board wipe insurance, especially if you're holding up any kind of interaction or instant speed plays. If you have them on board, you can also dump that mana into Fungal Plots or Night Soil to just rebuild your board really, really quickly. The next category is interaction, and honestly, it's a pretty light category. It's an aggro deck. You really just want to be attacking. Your primary focus is killing people. And really, once you have enough Saprolings on board, it doesn't matter what your opponents are doing. You're just trying to overrun them with mushrooms before they can get anything under control. But I do have a few pieces of interaction, and honestly, I've never cast any of these when I've played this deck. Song of the Dryads is removal. If someone has a blocker or some really problematic card, a stacks piece, a crawl space, a propaganda, or ghostly prison, you can just turn it into a forest and get it out of the way. So this is pretty good, pretty helpful. Last but not least are the lands. Well, first of all, it's a mono green deck, so 30 forests. It's a pretty simple mana base. It's a pretty inexpensive mana base. But aside from Diamond City, which we've already seen, here are a handful of utility lands. Number 1, Emergence Zone. Pay 1, tap, sacrifice it. You can cast spells as though they had flash. This helps rebuild after board wipes. It helps you recast Shroofus after a board wipe. So this goes in the rebuild category. Next up, Rogue's Passage and Access Tunnel. So these two just help you get damage in if someone has a big board and a lot of blockers. We have War Room for a little extra card draw. I mean, it's a monocolored deck, so War Room's almost an auto include, I feel. Fountain Port is here for a little extra card draw as well. If you need to sacrifice a token to draw a card, you can do that. That's kind of the only mode on here that I would really use, but this really isn't that important. It's like a $6 or $7 card. You could cut it for another forest, if I'm being honest. And then finally, Oran Reef, the Vastwood, it's a pseudo Anthem on a land. You can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So whether you're making 2 or 20 Saprolings, this will put a +1/+1 counter on all of them. Pretty good effect to have on a land. All right, now let me just give you a quick example of how explosive this deck can be. Turn 1, play a land and a piece of 1 mana ramp. We'll say a mana dork. Turn 2, play a land, 3 mana, cast Shroofus. Turn 3, you go to attack with Shroofus, someone tries to remove him. Honestly, it's better for you that way, because you can spend 2 mana, pump him, protect him, Vines of Vastwood gives him hexproof, +4/+4. Now he's a 5/5, dealing 5 damage and making 3, 4, 5 Saproling tokens. Turn 4, you untap with 7 1/1s on the board. Oh, Beastmaster Ascension. Attack with your 7 1/1s. That turns on Beastmaster Ascension. Now it's 7 6/6s. That's 42 damage. If someone doesn't have any blockers, they're out. And, well, this isn't a Saproling, but you just made 36 more 6/6 Saprolings. What are we on now? Turn 5? As long as no one has a board wipe, it's pretty much game over at this point. Now, obviously that's an ideal scenario, but the deck is definitely set up to try to play this type of line every single game. It's not always going to be Beastmaster Ascension. It might take an extra turn or two, but hopefully you've got enough protection in your hand, you're getting a decent amount of card draw, and you're going to have a ton of Saprolings very, very quickly. It's a pretty fun deck to play, but you do have to play a little aggressively. I mean, it's aggro. You have to be aggressive. That means you have to be willing to attack someone with an empty board, take them out first, never take your foot off the gas. I know not every person or every play group wants to play that way, but as long as everyone's up for it, it's a pretty fun time. Obviously, when it works well, but it is, like I said, weak to removal of Shroofus, it's weak to board wipes, so in all my play testing, I've spent a lot of time tuning it, trying to figure out ways to rebuild it, how to play it effectively, and that means kind of holding things back, expecting board wipes, and trying to be ready to rebuild. Last night I played a game with it that went to turn 10 probably, and I was able to outlast a board wipe, rebuild, and still pull out the win. So as long as you can kind of set things up so that you're ready to rebuild when the board wipe inevitably hits, you can even win in a longer game. It doesn't just have to go fast. It's definitely capable of going very fast, but I'm going to continue to tune it to try to make it more resilient. So if you have any cards, suggestions that can help make it more resilient to board wipes, let me know down in the comments. And again, thank you for watching, subscribing. I didn't expect this, but here we are. I'm really excited about Magic, so there's going to be plenty more coming on the channel. If for some reason you missed the first video that I uploaded here on the channel, check it out right here. I go over one of my group hug decks in that video. And if you want to see a video where I went to Japan, I was doing a lot of retro hunting, but also checking out a lot of card shops, that video is right here. Thanks for watching.